So we will begin our roundtable. Since we are not very numerous, I suggest people sitting quite far from us, coming to the front seats, so we'll have more interactions. And I'm just waiting.
There are 2 mics up there.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Merci. In case there is some people in the audience who were not here for the keynote session, we have prepared a very few slides as a summary of the main findings of this global plant health assessment. So, as it was told, it's an international peer-reviewed evaluation of the state of plant health across ecoregions of the world and of the effects of plant disease on ecosystem service. So the overall ambitions of the GPHA was to achieve a first science-based snapshot of plant health in important natural and human-managed ecosystems worldwide. And so far, 33 plant systems by ecoregions were included. Here you have again the world map with the different systems that were assessed. Forest systems, agriculture systems, peri-urban horticulture and household gardens, and urban vegetation. The health status was rated on a 5-level scale from excellent to bad, and the evolution of the health of the system was rated as declining, improving, and stable. And here you have one example on peri-urban horticulture and household gardens. So the organization of the GPHA, it was based on a global consortium of 91 volunteers from 30 countries working under the umbrella of the International Society of Plant Pathology. A uniform set of reporting criteria were developed and utilized, and data were produced by local experts for each plant system in each ecoregion. And so 33 reports were produced following a uniform format. So just 2 slides about the main findings. The plant health was found only fair or poor in a large number of ecoregions by plant system cases, and it declines in a majority of them. The provisioning service is often good, mostly stable, but often it declines and rarely it increases. Regulating service is often insufficient or poor, and it declines in a great majority of cases. And the cultural service was seldom assessed, and in many cases of poor status and of decline. And so, as Neil presented just before, some challenges were highlighted: the pandemics, the emergencies of plant pathogens, climate change, of course, is an important factor. And one challenge is the implementing inspiration from nature in plant system and to increase the diversity of the systems. Another main problem is the pesticide usage. And one of the main concerns is the state of plant health in sub-Saharan Africa. And we also highlighted some knowledge gaps. For urban forest, Amazon forest, household gardens, we have a lack of data. And for the global south, we have also a lack of data. And for ecosystem services, there was a weak interest and a lack of methods for the regulating and cultural dimensions. So I give the microphone to Bruce for the continuing.
Okay, so thanks for giving me a chance to get the mic here. So the big idea here is to have what's called a roundtable discussion. And as you know, there's almost 100 scientists involved in creating these reports across these many ecoregions. And these 100-odd scientists have had many discussions among themselves in creating these reports. And we've had many other special meetings to discuss how to use them and what they mean. And what's really clear at this point is we need to get outside of these 100 people and gather inputs from a broader community of interested scientists. And we couldn't think of a better scientific community to start with than that represented by the ICPP. So essentially, this is why we wanted to invite you to be part of this roundtable. And what we're seeking at this point is to have some feedback. And we already had a little feedback in the questions we received from those three presentations. And we not only want to get more feedback on how the current reports are structured, but we want ideas on how to proceed. And the first questions were like, so what are you going to do next? And that's what we want to discuss with a wider audience beyond the 91 people within the GPHA already. And of course, we're hoping to convince some new people to join and bring in their special competences and expertise. So this discussion process is going to be hopefully facilitated by myself and Pascal Fry. We're the two moderators for this roundtable discussion. And arrayed here on the stage with us are experts, some of the experts who put these reports together and designed the questionnaires and organized the overall efforts. And you are the interested scientists that we're hoping to reach. And what we really want is to get some feedback from you, some ideas on how to proceed, put your thumbs on the weaknesses we haven't already identified, and maybe even come up with a grand idea that helps us to redirect the whole process to make it even better. So this is what we're hoping to hear from you. Now, in order to facilitate the communication process, we have two microphones standing in the back of this bottom section of seats, and if you don't have your smartphone with you, or you don't want to use the app, but you do have something you want to talk about, please use those microphones. But if you would rather remain anonymous and just fire in a question or a comment via the chat function of the ICPP2023 program, please use that as well. And Pascal and I will be monitoring those chats constantly to see who is saying what. So with that, I think that's it. Oh, no. A very important thing. We're going to seed the discussion, so it's not going to be a completely random effort here. We came up with a list of questions, which we call the key questions, which you can all see up there, and those will remain projected through this discussion process. And these are questions that we think are important, but I don't want you to think that we only want your feedback on these questions. So if you have other questions that aren't represented in these 5 different categories, then please bring those also into the discussion. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. If you queue up for the microphones, please go that way. Otherwise, we will start looking at our phones. Unless, yeah, I saw the first person back there. And please, fire away.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Can you speak into the microphone?
Speak louder. You guys are going to be worried. All right. No, it's working again. Please relax. I think it wasn't on, but now it's on. Okay, great. So I have a question about I've read parts of it, and I scanned specifically the potatoes in South America. And I'm ignorant about potatoes, don't work on them, love them as the crop. But the center of origin is the Andes, and we can see that your evidence points to plant health being stable, but the ecosystem services on a decline. I wanted to know if you have any thoughts on the fact that this is the center of origin for the crop. That's it. Just thoughts on that.
Who wants to try to address that? Karen.
Hi. Yeah, this is a nice plant here. I'll come out in front of it. Thanks. Yeah, so I'm like the 80th or 90th of these 100 scientists, so I appreciate these 10 or so of the top scientists. But so I was involved in that one, and And it was very difficult, as you can imagine, to come up with these estimates. And some of the estimates were influenced by current new challenges from plant diseases. So I think that was the best perspective at the moment. And one of the good things about the global plant health assessment is we can keep improving it, right? So if you have more points about that, that would be, about that system or other systems, that would be great to take into account for the future development of it. Thanks.
I'm just curious if there'll be, like, is there impact, what are your opinions on that? Do you see similar trends with the other crops?
I'm sorry, I did not get your point. I did not get your question. Can you say it again?
So the question is linked to the center of origin for the crop. So I want to know if you've seen similar trends where the center of origin for the crop, has maybe a stable for plant health, but decline in the ecosystem services. And if you think, do you have any opinions? It's just, I'm just thinking, that's where our diversity comes from, for breeding, for example. Not that I'm a breeder, but yeah. Does that make sense? Have I expressed myself clearly?
Well, I'm not sure I understood really. So what we could document in actually a few examples was that we would describe the status of health of a given system in a given region as stable or declining because the level of disease was maintained, or maybe in some cases there would be emergencies or re-emergencies of some diseases. So usually this would correspond to a health level which would be stable or declining. And then when we looked at, let's say, provisioning service, then it was much easier because for crops we would look at the yield trends. And so like in the case where I was involved, which was wheat in Europe, we looked at the trends and we saw that, yeah, it's still stable over the last 10 years. The yields actually, if you see, they are not improving anymore. They're stable. In some cases, we can even see some decline. But the yardstick was really about looking at the trend in the yield and trying to think about how this trend was affected by diseases. So actually, in the case of provisioning service, the net result is about the status and the trend in the ecosystem service, so yield and production, and how this trend has been, in our expert opinion, affected by diseases. So you see, the exercise actually was not so direct. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
May I try and add a maybe slightly different point of view? The question is very interesting because of the long-term trend versus short-term trend. And to me, the fact that some ecoregions correspond to the centers of origin and centers of diversity of the crop, these are important in terms of evolutionary time, rather than just the 30 years that were covered by the assessment. So, and they do not necessarily reflect either the actual diversity of the cultivated varieties that are present in that region. It's not because you are growing potatoes in the Andes that you are growing a vast array of genetic diversity in the Andes, in that specific region. It might be the case, but not always. So it's quite important and challenging to be able to distinguish between the short lapse of time upon which the reports concentrated from the longer evolutionary time that is relevant for agricultural purposes. And maybe that's something we could also, that might be another way of looking at the reports and seeing whether we find some trends about the cases where the ecoregions correspond to the centers of origin and the reports that corresponds to ecoregions that do not correspond to the centers of origin. Honestly, I don't think we have done that so far.
No, I agree, Didier. I think a direct answer to your question, Lisa, would be that that wasn't a factor that was explicitly considered, but it's a really interesting point. But it actually accesses another feature that wasn't mentioned during the paper presentations that came out at the workshop on Sunday, which is the surprising lack of data from the Mediterranean basin that actually was available to the experts. And of course, that region is incredibly important as the center of origin and diversity for a number of really important species that feed us, and we have almost no expert opinion so far on that region for most of the major crops. So there's some interesting gaps and linkages that your question highlights. So thank you for asking it.
Just quickly, Neil, we may have one though. So the talks generated somebody from Spain who said they're very interested in helping fill those gaps.
Success. Okay. Again, that was a very great starting the discussion. I see someone else standing next to the microphone. I think that's Jim Stack, but I'm not sure from here. But please, let's hear it.
Hi, Bruce. Yeah. First of all, just a few comments. First of all, congratulations. This is really well done. I think it's a very important project, and it'll have a lot of utility beyond what you might have imagined in the beginning. To follow up on the previous one, I think it's a very important point. And for the Mediterranean region, you might want to check with Bikram Gill. So Bikram spent a career collecting germplasm from the Mediterranean region. And he more recently made comments about the decline in the status of the center of origin for grains, small grains, due to urban encroachment, civil unrest, a whole host of things. I would check with Bikram Gill. I think he'd be an excellent asset.
Thanks. Great idea.
If we could have the reference of that, that would be very helpful.
Certainly. Yep. Then the other comment, during the previous session, one or two people mentioned the narrow focus on plant pathogens, and I was just thinking that what you could do in time is get a version of it, a template, pass it on to the Weed Science Society, pass it on to the Entomological Society, and let them use the same tools so that you can kind of assimilate the data eventually. But I was just thinking that might be a way to get a wider range of expertise that can contribute to an assessment of plant health.
Another excellent idea. Does anyone want to make a comment on that? Reaching out to entomologists, weed scientists? No. Okay. Okay, Serge. And then I have one question in the chat. We'll come to that in a minute. But I'm sorry. Okay. You'll take care of it. But Serge first. Give you a few minutes.
Okay. If I may, these are sorts of afterthoughts on the presentations that have been made. Things that are important. I think that there was one quick reference to the concept of TFP, total factor productivity. So that's the ratio of what one gets from a system relative to what one has invested in a system. So total factor productivity was invented by an economist, Prabhu Pingali, senior economist at ERI and later on at the FAO. And what we see is that there is a decline of total factor productivity in some of the key agricultural systems in the world, and that is particularly true in the rice agrosystems of Asia. And that is particularly related to the use and overuse of pesticides. That's one aspect on which we did not insist very much on. Another aspect on which we did not insist very much on is the aspect of mycotoxin. Mycotoxins are becoming, people pay more and more attention on mycotoxins all the time, but it may still not be quite enough in the sense that we mentioned the emergence of false smut in rice in Asia, but there are all the mycotoxin producing organisms in maize and other crops in sub-Saharan Africa. That is an aspect of crop loss, but because these are crop losses, but that's a crop loss not in weight. It's a crop loss that is relative to the nutritional quality of grain. And so presumably we should do a better job in incorporating better that mycotoxin aspect. The truth is though, mycotoxin data in many places are very scarce. And then the third afterthought on the talks that have been made, even though it was shown on the map, on one of the many maps, is MENA, the Middle East and North Africa region, which is a major grain importer, major importer of food globally. It's one of the regions in the world where climate change is hitting the most, and it's one of the regions in the world where we also have a very large population rate of increase, along with, as you know, political and religious instability. This is a world area where plant pathologists may contribute in terms of peace and stability. There are major diseases in wheat and other crops in chickpea, a crop which we did not address in the global plant health. We did not look at legumes, by the way, in the global plant health area, despite the advice of one of our colleagues. Probably we should in the future. Legumes are a key element for a transition for a less meat-dependent diets. So, and so on and so forth. The afterthoughts are endless, but these are some of the important ones I have at the moment.
Thanks for those important afterthoughts and sharing them. I see someone standing patiently next to the microphone back there, and I want to give them a chance to bring in some new fodder.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name's Bryony Taylor, and I'm from CABI, and I'm the coordinator for modelling and data science. So not a plant pathologist, and it's my first time at this meeting. First of all, I just want to say congratulations on the report. It looks amazing, and I really appreciate how difficult it is to distill such a complex subject into really easily interpretable figures that people can see. And I guess at CABI we've been working from the other end on crop losses through the Global Burden of Crop Loss programme. And it really resonates with Neil's last slide that said about the data gaps and data availability, especially in the Global South. So I just wanted to highlight that that's something that we're working on under the bonnet in Global Burden of Crop Loss, is trying to collate data and to bring these types of impact data together on biotic and abiotic losses. And there's a way that our programs can interface and combine efforts. And when it gets to extending this type of information, it should be done in a unified way. So the continuum of collaboration is all at the collaboration end, I guess. So yeah, I guess that's, it's more of a comment. I've got a presentation tomorrow on GBCL, so I'm happy to show you guys where we're at with that. But yeah, just I think I've been, rambling on now. First time in an amphitheatre on a microphone. But I've been doing a lot of work with our CAB Thesaurus team, which looks at ontologies and how things are nested within other things. And global burden of crop loss is only one little nest of what the global plant health assessment is doing. But if we can filter up in some way the work that comes out of our programme, then looking at those aligned information pathways from different sectors. We're focused on crops and agriculture, but if there's similar assessments in the environment, like looking to bring those initiatives on board and really sort of filtering things together to present a unified message, I guess. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for that feedback. That's also very useful. I think the whole idea of open data is always a good thing, and I don't know if we don't really have raw data. We have the reports. So essentially, in our case, it's the raw data is in the words of the experts who created the report, and but this is certainly something we should look at going forward, is find ways to turn these ideas into numbers and make them publicly available. But I see two people ready to comment on that, so please.
I'll just add, I know in some situations, like what we would have done in North America, so it's not necessarily a data gap, but it's not actually that easy to always find the data. We had to dig into that literature, and we had to go into some of the Canadian literature. It's buried in articles, and so for each of the reports, where as much as possible, you will find references, kind of key references that are driven or were used by those reports specifically to help understand what we were looking at, what type of data. And if I remember correctly, the reviewers actually asked for that as well. So there are some checks and balances, but definitely I think it has helped uncover huge gaps where we know we're missing a lot of information.
Okay, excellent. Thanks again. And I think there's another person coming up, so thanks for offering your feedback here.
Yes, I mean, I guess you get a lot of feedback now, and it's such an important piece of document, that you created. I'm not sure if you want to actually hear even more ideas and, thoughts about it, what you can just bring it on. Okay, because one of the things, I guess, that crossed my mind when I heard about it and I, start looking through it was like, how do you see some trends or this document give you ideas about what we do right, if we do something right, and can we learn from that? So, there are some areas where you see that actually it's not declining. I mean, trying to look at the positive side and see, is this maybe it's just climate. Maybe, you can say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. But in order to extract something that we, as plant pathology, just have maybe done and it actually worked, is that something that we can...
What is in common with those bright green boxes with an upward angled arrow? So
yes.
With a high confidence. So what lessons can we take from those examples?
Exactly, because that would really get us on the path to action. I mean, now we have a map, and I know there are holes in the map, and we can improve the map, and I think we can spend a lot of time to do that. But we have a rough map, and we can maybe now actually find a way through where we can, as plant pathologists, contribute and really make a difference for the better. And I think that is a very good first step forward. Yeah. I don't know, if this is just completely idealistic or if you can actually see an opportunity in this.
And now comes feedback from an expert.
Thank you very much for this point. Yes, this is a very useful and important idea. One of the things we could do could be that we compare the same keystone species in agricultural. We're speaking of agricultural systems, and we compare that the status of of the agricultural system with this keystone species across different ecoregions. But then, moving across ecoregions, we move across, as it was explained, we move across socioeconomic, technical contexts. We move across climatic environments and ecological environments, and so that comparison would be very, very risky, tricky to do. But nevertheless, that's an important point. The report is not meant to be necessarily a source for depression. And so we should provide the reader maybe with some elements of hope. I'm jumping to the previous remark, which was more of a comment regarding the global burden of crop loss, which actually is the title of an article that ICPP published we published in Nature, Ecology and Evolution a few years back. We published an article called "The Burden of Crop Losses," the global burden of crop losses, and that work, which was conducted before this particular project, was also based on expert opinion. And again, that's emphasizing the fact that we are short, we are strongly limited in quantitative data. Now, to come back to this present project and to come back also to the notion of crop loss, then there is the two projects have this common element of being, first of all, collective action projects with zero budget and only the support of the society to help us go. The other elements on which I would like to emphasize is that when field data are lacking and when one wants to look not at the past, but rather try to look into the future or possible futures, the key instrument for this is simulation modeling. And so, whereas we are equipped with a number of simulation models that will help us address the recent past and foreseeable futures with models in a number of crops, but a main aspect of the global plant health assessment was that it was also looking at forests, at natural ecosystems, and household gardens and systems like that. So then things may become far more complex. So.
So again, to kind of directly respond to your question, I think in some of the instances where the state of health is currently excellent, and I'm going to pick on rice systems in South Asia as an example, I think that reflects a history of plant pathologists together with plant breeders doing something right. And of course, it's a direct consequence of what happened during the Green Revolution. The thing that perhaps we haven't been so good at is to see how to secure the gains that were made then and make them sustainable. And that I'm not so confident that we really know how to be good at that, but I'm not sure anybody really knows how to be good at that in any context. But I think what that highlights for us is the difficulty of foreseeing the long-term consequences of actions taken currently to avert crises, you know. And if you look, and I think there's a meaningful connection here, because part of the reason why we're here on the stage today is because Dr. Borlaug set the ICPP the challenge of continuing his legacy, I think at the 2008 Congress in Edinburgh. And so, in a way, you can trace this event and this exercise back to him giving us that challenge to respond to. So there's a legacy there of something we did right, but it has led to unforeseen difficulties in the present, the future of when those actions were taken. And so we're both good at that, but I have to qualify it by saying that we need to be better at perhaps predicting unintended consequences of good acts in the present when we think about what might happen in the future.
Okay, thanks very much. I know that we could continue on on this theme, but I see two more patient people waiting to make an input, and I want to give them a chance to bring it in. So I'll start with the gentleman on my left. That would be where anyone else is.
Thank you for this opportunity to share my view on this topic. I'm Oshudansi Balaji from ITA, Nigeria. And my question is simple. I just want to find out, in your plan for the future work, are you planning to include in some indigenous crop that are playing significant role, in terms of marginal role, in terms of in some of this ecosystem, like the West Africa that was discussed here, the sub-Sahara, West Africa where I come from, we have yam. And this is like the second most important tuber crop, and it serves as an important staple. I believe this crop is playing so much in terms of food security, and the model will not really be complete if some of these crops are not included. So what are your plans to, I know this applies to some other regions too, so what are your plans? Then the second question I wanted to ask is that one of the decline in quotes that we are experiencing in West Africa especially is inability to preserve some of these harvests adequately. This affects food availability to some of our populace because what we produce we can't adequately store. And this is contributing to decline in terms of food production in West Africa. So how do you plan to include some of this in the model to give us a more informative approach to what we are seeing? Thank you.
Thanks for that input. I'll give a very general answer, but I want the experts to give the full feedback. We want to add a whole lot more, and we need people like you to actually get out there and become the expert and fill in the missing gaps. But please.
Well, I was going to say the same thing, Bruce. I can't say that I'm going to speak for all of the team, but I would say what we plan to do is to ask you to form a team to look at that crop and provide a report on it for your region. And that could be the first new addition to the next generation of the plant health assessment. So the methodology is available, and I'm sure members of the team would be willing to help facilitate the early stages of the process and help you understand how it would be done. But if you form a team of people in your region, then you can carry out one of the assessments and that crop can be included in there. And then once we've got one important indigenous crop, I'm sure others will follow, because who wants to be left out of something as exciting as this project, right?
Just if I may, that's also a point we briefly discussed in the workshop on Sunday. One specific situation that might need an improvement in the methodology is the cases where you have plenty of different plants grown at the same time on the same place, like the household gardens or some very mixed croppings. And then the question that arises is whether it does make sense to have a crop-by-crop assessment in that kind of setup, or whether the correct assessment would be of the system as such, the mixed cropping as such. And this brings new questions as to how to assess the health status of that kind of stand, and also how to assess the stability of that status over time, because those associations might by themselves not be stable.
I just have a comment. I fully agree with what has been said so far. What I'd like to say is to comment on from a peripheral standpoint on this, which is in the editorial board of food security, we look very closely at the situation of food security in sub-Saharan Africa. And what we see over the last 2 decades, and in particular the last decade, is a steady increase and massive increase of rice imports. So much so that many countries in sub-Saharan Africa are now dependent for their food security on rice imports. And so in that context, the point you raise makes a lot of relevance. It brings about issues that go far beyond plant pathology, but again, where plant pathology has a role to play.
Excellent. Thanks for all that. Thanks for all that feedback. That's fun to see. Now another person has very patiently waited for their opportunity. Please, let's hear your ideas.
Yeah, so it's great to see that this report includes the direct provisioning and the ecosystem services. And we often discuss the idea of cases where there are trade-offs between productivity and environmental protection. So I was wondering if you've got an overall impression from this report. Are there more cases where there is that trade-off, so production's being maintained or increased at the cost of some of the other ecosystem services? Or are there some good examples that we could learn from where both are being preserved or increased? Or perhaps some threats to both, and where tackling that threat would be a win-win for the production and the ecosystem?
Okay. Trade-offs. I love trade-offs. Please, go at it.
Yeah, so apparently there's some audio issues with echo on that side of the stage, so I'm going to try and rephrase the question. So if I understood the question correctly, it really essentially is centered on the question of whether we were able to identify ecoregions and crop combinations where it was clear there was a trade-off between primary provisioning of food and other ecosystem services. So was food or fiber being produced clearly at the expense of environmental degradation, or water quality or other environmental services? So did we pick up any clear trade-offs?
Yes. Can someone come up with an example? Was there
Yes.
one that was really...
There is one clear example which comes from, again, from Sub-Saharan Africa, where the colleagues have shown that diseases on banana and plantain are forcing farmers to move away from their farms and fields, and that results in encroaching in forests. And so this is destroying biodiversity, and this is affecting the water cycle. That's one example. There is another example from the team led by Professor Karen Garrett, where it's been shown that they report that farmers, and it's been said during the presentation, farmers are moving higher in elevation to escape from disease, particularly late blight, and in doing so they encroach on natural ecosystems. And then again, these ecosystems, these montane ecosystems are extraordinarily vulnerable. And besides, it doesn't work because climate change catches up, and so it's a race. So yeah, there are trade-offs. The key question for science, and the key mistake, in my opinion, which has been committed in the 20th century, is the conflict between the conservation of biodiversity and the secure world from the standpoint of food security. And this is a lock-in from which we must escape, because there's no hope. We need the both, the biodiversity and the food security.
I just realized that the questions that we thought were going to be projected continually have disappeared. I'll see if I can find a remedy for that. But in the meantime, there's, did we get your question answered there, Nicola?
So you mentioned an example where there are trade-offs. Are there any success stories where there aren't, where they've managed to protect the crop and the environment?
Success stories, no trade-offs. Does anyone have one? Not off the tips of our tongues, but if you read through those reports, you might find a few.
It's probably sometimes difficult to answer that kind of issue from a limited panel of reports, especially given that in many of those reports, the only ecosystem service that was really assessed was provisioning. So it's hard to say whether it comes at the expense of another service that is not evaluated itself. And that's also another reason why we might welcome further reports, and maybe also sometimes complements to already existing reports if there are any further data available that allow to assess services other than provisioning in those situations?
But if I may, there are success stories, but these are not reported. Well, yes, they are partly mentioned. They are mentioned in the book, but these are not recent success stories. I'm referring to the work of Dr. Tom Miao of the International Rice Research Institute, which was followed by the work conducted by Dr. Rebecca Nelson, also at the International Rice Research Institute. Both of them worked on bacterial leaf blight of rice. And before the work was undertaken by Dr. Tom Miao, who was recruited as IRRI was created, so at the beginning of the Green Revolution, it was not possible to grow rice in many millions of hectares of rice because of what is called cresec, which are the first symptoms of bacterial blight, which is destroying young seedlings a few weeks after planting. Thanks to the breeding of host plant resistance against bacterial blight, rice is being produced in the lowlands of Asia, including in those millions of hectares. And I'm speaking of tens and hundreds of millions of hectares across Asia. This has been a major success, which has not been much advertised, not much published. It's a major success story, which has made those agrosystems, which were anyway cultivated, which has made them very productive and sustainably so. So that's one of the best and nicest story where plant pathologists, really directly in a relatively recent past, contributed to success of this kind.
An excellent success story. That's a good one to share. I think we can go to the next question I see near the microphone back there, and then we'll come over to the right side.
Yeah, thank you very much for the work and the open discussion. I've made
Could you get a little bit closer to the microphone?
Yes. So I've made a couple of points, but before I go into them, I wanted to ask if you have presented these results to policymakers in any country or at any higher level, and then I can elaborate more on my questions.
The answer is no.
So the reason why I say so is because I think it's very relevant. I can speak for the EU because I'm from there, but I think it will, so they made a report, the European Environment Agency. They also release report every 4 or 5 years, I believe, about the state of the biodiversity and environment. And I was wondering if there was any overlap with any other reports, be it in scientific community or the literature research you used, because the scientists in their reports, they also point out that we have to do something, and they target the policies. So they say they also note deteriorating effects on everything, basically ecosystems, and they point out that policymakers should be targeted. So was there any overlap?
So how much overlap do we have with the GPHA compared? Is this not working? How much overlap do we have?
Yeah, so again, to repeat the question, have we engaged with policymakers? Has the report been presented to policymakers? And have we considered potential overlaps with other reports that maybe report on a regular basis to policymakers where there may be implications for policy that we touch on, which existing reporting bodies also touch on, for example, biodiversity or climate impact? The short answer to your question, since I've got the microphone and I'm talking, is no. So the report was launched here today. About point 5 you can see is about engagement strategy for trying to raise awareness amongst policymakers about this issue, for example. And going back over a decade or more, there's, I think, a recognition on our part that it's very difficult to keep plant health and the implications for declining plant health on the radar of policymakers when they have so many other issues to deal with that probably have, in some cases, stronger lobbying groups able to keep their attention focused on, or which literally just are, in any objective sense, more critical at any point in time. But the launch of the report here at the conference is the very first step. And we would be interested to hear from people who have thoughts on the best pathway for us to engage with policymakers in different parts of the world. In North America, we're rather fortunate in that there's a very direct way to do that. They don't always listen, but the door is usually open to hear things. And so there's a very transparent process in some ways for us to take these results to legislature and also to the executive branch. In other parts of the world, it's a more difficult process to understand. So for example, here in the EU, would the first step be to go to the Parliament, the Commission, or the Council? Because there's a very complex sharing of political decision making. So just that's my own personal initial response. But if you have thoughts on the topic, we would love to hear them because it's one of our next steps.
And I think Paul has something to say there. No?
It's very similar, and I would
Okay.
just say in our workshop on Sunday, that was a key element of what we were discussing. And so I think I'd reiterate what Neil was just saying. There's opportunities for that sort of feedback. He's right. I think I used in the workshop, to give you a simple example of how it works for us sometimes. I was meeting with farmers from 13 states 2 weeks ago. They asked if they could meet the chair of the House Ag Committee, who happened to be from Pennsylvania. I can get in contact with the right person who can get in contact with that staff. And 2 weeks prior, he goes, yes, I'll be there. I'll meet him here. It's a Q&A, simple session before he has to go. And so he's got the ear of 13, 14 very powerful farmers. It's a very different system than a lot of places in the world, but these are the sort of things we are wrestling with, and we got a lot of feedback on Sunday, I think, already, and there's many more opportunities to explore how best to do this, especially at the global scale.
Yeah, I think it's also important to be aware of those overlaps that already could exist with other agencies, so we need to be more aware of that. Did we answer your question? Do you have a sort of a follow-up?
I had a follow-up, but I see more speakers, so I think I can follow up when they raise their questions.
Okay, then let's keep moving forward. And another person standing by the microphone there. I can't see who that is, but it looks like Frederic, maybe?
Yes,
Sufer?
it's Frederic Sufer.
Okay.
So I have maybe it's a comment just between the previous comment and the comment and question from Nicolas. So it's about the choice of policymaker to which you could communicate. So it's a comment because I think the report and the global plant health assessment could be interpreted in two ways, but two different ways, and maybe contradictory ways. So I will just take the example of the potatoes situation in Europe. So regarding the assessment, the report could convince that plants need to be protected, and for instance, potatoes, and that it's a good thing, but this can be used to convince that we need more pesticides, and I don't know exactly, but maybe 20 treatments, so it's not enough, and so the conclusion could be misused from my point of view to convince that more fungicides are needed, but it can be used from a really contradictory, very different ways. Is that in the case of potatoes, the ecosystem services are decreasing, if I remember, from 20, the two last decades. So, and this conclusion of decreasing ecosystems services could be used to convince that the potatoes crop in these production situations are not sustainable, and could be used to convince that we have to stop to cultivate potatoes in this production situation. So what I want to say is that it's very strong different conclusion, but if the policymakers misunderstand the conclusion of the report or analyze in their own sense, they can conclude very two different ways. And we have, I think you, not me, because you are the author of the report, you have to accompany and explain how to understand the conclusion. And so it's not a question, I'm sorry, it's just a comment, and I would like to have your opinion about this this example.
Yeah, very useful feedback, Frederic. I mean, different stakeholders or interest groups could interpret the reports in very different ways and use it, the same report, to further their interests. So that's a great point.
That's a very important point, because it shows how important it is to read the reports correctly. Because if you read the report on the European health status on potatoes, what does it say? It says the health status is good because of pesticides, and the provisioning situation is declining because the yields are going down overall, but not the yields per hectare, the total yield of potatoes, simply because we grow less potatoes in Europe than we did 20 years ago. So it would be quite easy to debunk the point that we need more pesticides and that the situation is bad because of the pesticides. It's not bad because of the pesticides, it's just bad because the global market is not there anymore. So it means that we should not just have a look at the small squares and arrows. You need to go down and deep and read the reports themselves if you want to have the correct information. And maybe it's our role as well, when we go to policymakers or to other stakeholders that won't take that won't make the effort to read each and every report in every detail, to extract that information for them, so that they do not misinterpret what's the actual content of the reports. And by the way, if I may come back to a past question about what did we do right, and can we analyze what we do right? Maybe sometimes, if we have a look at all those situations where the status is green and the health status is good, in many cases it is artificially so, because it's at the cost of heavy pesticide use. So we might not like that the idea that what we do right is just spray a lot of pesticides all over the world on many different crops. And that might not be the kind of message that we want to propagate across both the scientific community and the policymakers.
To complement the answers, yeah, there could be many parallels to the question which was asked, and because it's related to maybe shortcuts and political points of view. So a parallel could be made each time there would be some mass killing in, say, Northern America. You would have some fraction of the population and policy people saying, yes, we do need much more weapons so that people can be protected, right? And then you would have another fraction of people who would say, well, we need to remove all weapons from this country. And so maybe it's a very strong example, but I think as scientists, also we get many questions which are about management. And each time we need to answer that the main objective of this work was about an assessment of the situation and of so over the last 30 years, and then of the recent evolution, documented as best as possible from a reference. So we wanted to make really the best we could, as as a scientific work, and that's why also we thought that we could come up only with qualitative scales. And then as scientists, maybe to try to not have too much frustration and to go further, what we did was to make assessment not only in terms of plant health, but in terms of consequences on ecosystem services. And so then to answer your question, I think that the fact that we tried, it is true not for all the systems, but for at least some of the systems, to look not only at provisioning, but also at regulation and cultural, provides really much more information. And then it's up to each of us, I think, to see if we want to engage further as scientists or as citizens. But at least as scientists, it's good if we can provide the information as honestly as we can.
I want to say thank you, Fred, for asking the question, because it raises a really important point about the process of policy engagement. And it's, to be facetious slightly, the idea that the politicians might just look at the pictures is not a completely unimaginable scenario. And so asking them to read the text, it's easy to see that could lead to outcomes that we don't want. And so thinking about how to get them to give the time to engage with something a bit more deep than just look at the pictures is an important question, actually, although it sounds simplistic. It's easy, and I'm going to make a link here with something that we've thought about that hasn't been mentioned so far. The next step in that process, at least here in Europe, where I used to live and work on these kinds of issues, would likely be that the policymaker may well say, well, okay, do some science that would allow us to make a policy instrument that would move things in the right direction if we could encourage people to behave in a certain way. And so that question of which policy instruments need to, or are likely to come out of an analysis of this report and any subsequent reports, is a really important second generation question for all of us engaged in this exercise, because we would like them to be instruments that are useful. And here in the EU, the history of responses to the Common Agriculture Policy is like a graveyard of failed policy instruments that have failed to achieve very much, in all honesty, in terms of how to efficiently spend CAP euros over an extended period of time. So it's a really important question, and I mean it sincerely, Fred. I'm really grateful to you for asking it. It's a key question for us to think about in future, in my opinion.
Indeed. So I recognize there's another person at a microphone, but I want to ask you to wait for a moment because we want to take a few questions from the chat that are connected with forestry. And as soon as those are done, I will hope that you'll come back to that microphone. So rest for a moment.
Sorry, I try to be quick, so I will answer two questions that have been asked some time ago already, so I had some time to think about it. The first one was, are you planning to include agroforestry systems? So we never thought about it. Agroforestry, what is it? It's wood. Well, planting of trees for wood production, and at the same time on the same land cultivating a crop. So from the plant health point of view, of course, the plant health of an agroforestry system, it's a combination of health of the tree, which are tree diseases, the same as you can find in forest with the same tree species, and crop diseases, the same that you can find in fields. So, and the other point is that agroforestry, so far, it concerns a very small percentage of the acreage compared to forest surfaces and to crop forest surfaces. So. Yeah. So my opinion would be I think it's a good idea to mention, but it's not in the main plant system that we should look at the moment. But why not in the future, including agroforestry? Serge, if you have a comment.
Yeah. Just to address, there are agroforestry systems in the current assessment. A key one is the coffee tree system in Mesoamerica, which was not commented in any way in any other slides. And so that's one of the very important agroforestry systems in the world. And yes, agroforestry systems in the global north have disappeared, or nearly so. There is still some in the Mediterranean, but in the global south, it still is very important. And so it's not just coffee, but cocoa production. And then there is another one, which is with banana and plantain, which is nearly always associated with. So mixed crops and okay, you'd argue that a banana is not a tree, it's a big weed, but it's a very rather perennial thing that behaves more or less like a tree. And anyway, so, so this is a good point. This is a good point. And then, yes, increasing the interest in agroforestry would have to be like looking at more of the tropical agroforestry systems that are in existence and looking at agroforestry systems of the future in the global north.
And another question that was asked is, what about using data from the national forest inventories? They are available from many countries, are done in standardized ways, and often contain data relevant to tree health at different points in time. So I think the reports that have been produced by my forest pathology colleagues in different parts of the world have used some of those forest inventory data. At least for France, I know that Marie-Laure Lousteau, who wrote a report on oak forest in Europe, she relied on tree health, on forest health data coming from the Forest Health Service. So yeah, that's quite obvious. So thank you.
So, and thanks. I see already a couple more questions are coming in through the chat function, so please, we're seeing them and we'll get to them. But I would like to come back to that patient person who was standing at the speaker and give them a chance to bring in some ideas here.
Thanks. I guess it's more of a comment, but also half question. I'm really keen to get your thoughts on, and it's linked to biodiversity conservation. So I'm Australian, but have been living and working...
Can you speak closer to the microphone, because there is always this echo, we cannot hear the...
I'm Australian, but have been living and working in South Africa for quite a few years now, and the project that took me there was to work in botanical gardens under the framework of the International Plant Sentinel Network. And it's taken me some time to get my head around the situation, but you've got an area called the Cape Floristic region. It's insane in terms of species diversity. There's like 9,000 plant species there, 70% endemism, but more than 1,700 of them are at some level of threat of going extinct. So that's like 20% of them. So it's been called the hottest hotspot. And there's been huge efforts going into sort of doing the assessments to understand the threats to those species. A few things have been identified, like habitat destruction due to sort of urbanization and agricultural expansion, and then also the impacts of changing fire regimes and invasive alien plants. But pathogens are just not on the radar at all, and for sure they are driving some of those declines. And I mean, coming from Australia, I know that it is possible to recognise and sort of structure management around invasive pathogens, but I don't think South Africa is unique in that pathogens are considered in biodiversity conservation. And I've been trying to engage with the people that are working in that space, because there is money to do stuff in that space, and there's a lot of good pathologists in South Africa, and yet there just seems to be this massive gap. And I'm just wondering if any of you have any thoughts on whether this is a problem, particularly in maybe low and middle income countries, and how we address this, because I mean, there's a reason that hotspots are called hotspots. And I'm just curious to hear thoughts. Thanks.
Any feedback on that? How do we convince policymakers to try to protect biodiversity hotspots from invasive diseases that wipe out the biodiversity. I'm thinking the Jarrah dieback in Australia would be a great example. Myrtle rust also in Australia, taking out lots of species. So, any ideas?
I don't have a clue on that part of the question, but if I understood it well, there was another side of your question about the fact that the pathogens themselves can be regarded as part of the biodiversity of the system, and that's not unique to South Africa. I think we've had some instances of where we wanted to import some pathogen strains from South America, for instance, and we were prevented to do so because the local authorities considered that those pathogens were part of the Nagoya treaties, and they were useful especially as a means of screening for resistant genes in host plants, so as testers for useful traits, and as such they would qualify under the Nagoya treaties for the rights that apply to biological resources. So really the issue of whether pathogens are part of the global biodiversity is really intriguing.
Yeah, sorry, I think the focus of my question was a little bit different because I'm sort of more concerned about things that we know for sure are invasive in those environments and are having, I think, huge impacts, but those impacts are not being quantified and they're not being considered. And yeah, whether that's our fault as pathologists that we're just not considering that, or if that's, yeah, how do we get better at engaging with the people managing those, yeah, that biodiversity conservation, I guess.
I don't know the specifics of that situation, but I'm going to use the GPHA itself as an example of a methodological approach to the policy engagement problem that you're talking about. So as many of us have mentioned during the afternoon, everything that's been reported today was essentially done in a voluntary way. And so to try and tackle the problem you're talking about, and this is just a suggestion, carrying out a small pilot study, essentially without being funded to do it, to generate an initial set of data that it could at least be used to engage policymakers initially to say, there's a there that hasn't been thought about. This is something that is a gap in our response to this question at the moment. Here's the evidence that shows that it's a thing. Can we take it from there? But maybe an initial free pro bono voluntary exercise is all that you're going to be able to do to at least make a beginning.
There was still one question on the app, so maybe I'll take it.
Go.
Yeah, it was more methodological. So the question was, what about moving from qualitative to quantitative ratings? Fair and poor can mean different things to different people. Eliciting distributions could instead make assessments and their associated uncertainties more comparable across systems and time points. So I don't know if... Well, I'll get a first part of the answer and you can complete. The thing is that we, as we try to describe, although briefly this afternoon, we went through very pragmatic ways to, in order to be able to proceed and to make assessment over very, very different systems and different regions, and so that we could have some comparison, although only on a qualitative way. The thing is, if we, and so for this, as you've seen, there were many simplifications and many operational definitions which were needed. And if we had taken the path to go to quantitative assessments, we would have come up, I think, with very, very few examples on which we could have made a very decent report. So this is the rationale of us using this qualitative scale, although we are aware of, yes, the truth is that within this qualitative scale, what is good, what is fair, and these were discussions we had among groups. That's why also it was very important that for each report consisting of a given system in a given region, there would be a team of people. So each team would be anything between 3 and 5 experts, and this allowed in a way to get some kind of robustness in this qualitative scale. Then also, we have also sometimes discussions about this kind of weightings, and so green is green. Green means that it's not red, it's not just very, very bad. And so the idea is that when we look at the colors, it means sometimes plus or minus. We cannot take it as something really which is something which may not be taken in just a different level, just nearby. I don't know if you want to complete, some of you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's interesting to think about other possibilities for making it more quantitative. Like there's some expert knowledge elicitation methods where you get everybody together and try to get like upper confidence limits on your estimate of some quantitative value. But of course that's a bigger undertaking, more expensive undertaking to get people together, to have the facilitators to do that. But it would be interesting to consider for next stages. But then there's also the additional cost. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the question and also for the very thorough answers there. So at this point, I'm drawn to the sad fact, which is that we're almost out of time. And Serge Savary, who is one of the sort of leaders of this, a major leader of this whole effort, he wants to finish with a statement, and I think that's a good idea. So Serge, 5 minutes.
Just 5 minutes, yes. And I would like to talk to everybody. That's meaning to say that I'm talking to the audience, which I cannot see because there is light in my eyes, and to the colleagues and to the colleagues involved so far in the Global Plant Health Assessment. To recap briefly, the GPHA is a collective effort of scientists, of plant pathologists, dealing with forest systems, with agricultural systems, and with those systems which are so very important, which are called household gardens. We have had a series of very, very interesting questions and comments, which I have organized in different groups. One of them is related to the concept of biodiversity. We've had questions regarding the center of origin of crop species. We have had a question, but it also belongs to another category. We have had comments and questions regarding indigenous crops, and other comments regarding the trade-off between biodiversity and food, and the notion, a question of the protection of biodiversity against invasive species and invasive pathogens. So this is one group of elements. Then we had, I think it was James Stack, there are questions which are referring to some translations, some movement of the work we've done. And one idea is to use the same kind of tool to involve and to engage and commit colleagues in the weed sciences or the entomology world. There is, again, the notion of indigenous crop, which itself could be an element of transfer in the sense that there could be another phase, and there should be probably another phase, where we would get more information on other systems than just those we've looked at so far. And there have been questions that were related directly or indirectly with issues of management, such as what is it that we do right, Okay, to answer this question, I have a stash of antidepressants in my bag, so I don't know what we do right. We're insisting on the things we do wrong. Yeah, it's true. What is the success story? So and then questions regarding contradiction or apparent contradiction, but then again contradictions in symbols regarding services and production. Now, a key phrase which I retained from one of the GPHA leaders is the phrase second generation questions. And this is coming from the fact that I think personally that we've not been so very strong so far in the phrasing of recommendations. And that is not easy because the report we have is bulky. It looks at a diversity of systems, a diversity of problems, a diversity of questions, to come up with recommendations, things that a policymaker, who is a person which typically has zero time, recommendations are not easy to articulate. In order to do so, we probably would need also what I personally call policy instruments, which would be instruments for the policymaker to see what would be the benefit of implementing a policy. Because policymakers don't want only to have recommendations, they want to know how much, and often it's in money terms, but not necessarily, well, they want to know what will be the benefits derived from implementing such a decision. And so I'm turning to my colleagues and to everybody here in this audience with the idea that we really need a future meeting to work on those recommendations and those policy instruments. That is very much needed. And so in order to do so, we shall have to work in particular in order to find the funding, to organize a meeting somewhere, a workshop, where we can spend time, but real research and work time, like maybe 3-4 days of heavy work, heavy weight, and trying to iron out what it is that we phrase as recommendation and policy instruments. Thank you very much.
In other words, the work has just begun. We still have a long ways to go here. We're off to a good start. And we're off to a good start because of these people, plus an additional 85 odd people who aren't here today. I want to personally thank all of you for the work you've done. Someone said this was a great effort, and I can only echo that it's been a magnificent effort, and you all deserve a thunderous applause from at least 1,000 people, but we'll settle for just 20. And actually, I want to thank all of you for coming and for your patience and for your wonderful inputs. We've heard what we heard, and I'm sure that some of these ideas that you fed into this group will be actioned on in future discussions. And I'm quite sure that the GPHA is going to continue. If you have colleagues that you think might be interested in entering into this group, we welcome more experts and more systems, and even trying to get away from a snapshot and into a time series, but maybe that's something we should be thinking about only 5 or 10 years in the future. So with that, I will draw an end to this roundtable and thank everyone involved, including the patient microphone and projection experts, for letting us go a little bit over time. Thanks for everyone.